Sign it tonight, Dad. 12 million doesn't wait.
Sentimental payroll ends now. Cut the dead weight.
You call them
Dead weight again and we're done talking.
chain of... Over my name? Over men who built this place? No.
Then retire and stop being an anchor.
Dual signature holds are active. Nothing moves.
Without me.
This trust predates your plan. 5 years real work, then 51% if values hold.
I make one call about Evelyn and your legacy evaporates.
Don't weaponize a dead woman.
You here to pose or to pour?
I'm here to work.
Talk is cheap, concrete isn't. Tomorrow, 5:30. Early means early.
I'll be earlier.
Show me the spine, not the speech.
I don't want the throne. I want the weight.
Then carrot it with both hands.
5 years. No shortcuts.
Deal. And 5% to the
My son stood in my study, the smell of my wife's perfume still clinging to the curtains, and said, "Dad, sign the $12 million business over." My daughter-in-law crossed her arms, certain I'd fold. I felt betrayed, gutted, but they never saw what was coming. What I revealed that night shattered their greedy plan in seconds. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in my study that evening, the house too quiet, the air heavy with memories I couldn't shake. The oak desk beneath my hands had been a gift from Evelyn on our 10th anniversary, a symbol of the years when we still believed time was endless. My fingers traced the worn grain of the wood, and with every ridge, I remembered the sacrifices I had made for David. $60,000 for his college tuition, every semester check written with pride, even when I had to work late nights to cover it. $25,000 for the first car he ever drove, a shiny blue sedan that he drove off the lot with a smile bigger than the sky. $80,000 for the wedding he and Melissa demanded, a lavish reception at the country club, chandeliers glittering, champagne flowing like water. I thought I was investing in his happiness. Now I realize I was feeding an appetite that would never be satisfied. The money was gone, but worse, so was the gratitude. I lifted my eyes to the shelves around me. Every corner of that study held pieces of a life Evelyn and I built together. The family company, valued now at $12 million, had grown from nothing but long nights and risk. The house, a 2-story home with wide windows and a rose garden Evelyn tended every morning, had become my sanctuary. The roses still bloomed outside, though the hands that planted them were gone. These weren't just possessions. They were our life, the evidence of everything we had poured ourselves into. And now, in the most ruthless twist, those same treasures were under threat from the very son I raised, the boy who once ran through that garden laughing with his mother. The betrayal cut deep. It wasn't just about money. It was about love turned into greed, about memory turned into bargaining chips. Evelyn always said to me, "David just needs more time. He'll find his way." Her faith in him was steady, unshaken, even when his choices disappointed me. But sitting there that night, I could no longer hide from the truth. I had seen his eyes as he stood across from me in that very room, demanding I sign over the business. He wasn't seeking responsibility. He was seeking control, pushed by Melissa's whispers. She was calculating every corner of the company, every acre of land, every dollar left in the accounts. Her eyes shone not with love for family, but with hunger. And I felt anger boiling in my chest, hotter than anything I had known in years. The son I loved was being dragged into her schemes, and the family I built was dangling over the edge of her ambition. At first, the weight of it broke me. I had buried Evelyn just 7 days before, and grief still clung to me like a shadow I couldn't escape. Now betrayal piled on top of that sorrow, pressing me down, almost convincing me to give in. I told myself maybe it would be easier to let them take what they wanted, to surrender and find peace in silence. But then another thought rose, steady and sharp. If I surrendered, I would not only lose the company, I would lose Evelyn all over again. Every late night she sat beside me at the office. Every word of encouragement, every prayer we whispered over payroll when times were hard, those sacrifices would be erased. No, I couldn't let grief make me weak. I couldn't let betrayal win. A new resolve stirred in me, small at first, then growing like a fire that caught dry wood. I would not be their victim. I turned my head toward the mantel where Evelyn's photograph sat. Her smile seemed to follow me, soft and steady. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the glass. "Evelyn," I whispered, my voice breaking, "I will not let them destroy what we built. I will not let your name, your work, your love be torn apart by greed." In that moment, my grief shifted. It was still there, but it no longer pinned me down. It became fuel, a reason to stand, a reason to fight. The house felt less empty, as if she had leaned in close, urging me on. I breathed deep, letting the anger and love mingle into something stronger. Determination. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one that held papers I hadn't touched since Evelyn passed. Inside lay the thick folder of company documents, deeds, bylaws, signatures collected over decades. Next to it, tucked neatly into a worn envelope, was the business card of Michael Grant, the lawyer who had stood by us through every negotiation. My hand hovered for a moment, my chest pounding, before I picked it up. I stared at the numbers printed there, crisp and clear, as if waiting for me. In that instant, the decision was made. I wasn't powerless. I had tools. I knew. I had allies. The room around me seemed to change as I sat back in my chair. The soft afternoon light slanted through the blinds, painting long shadows across the rug Evelyn chose 20 years ago. The air smelled faintly of her roses drifting in from the garden. Memories pressed in from every corner. The wooden floors I had laid myself, the photo album on the shelf filled with birthdays and Christmas mornings. This was more than a house. It was a living archive of our life together. And I realized with painful clarity, if I didn't act, all of it would be trampled. The betrayal wasn't only about money. It was about erasing history, erasing me, erasing Evelyn. I sat there for a long while, the phone in my hand, the photo of Evelyn watching from the mantel. I could almost hear her voice, calm but firm, the way she always steadied me when storms hit. "Stand tall, Thomas," she would have said. "Stand tall, and don't let them break what you've built." My fingers tightened around the phone. This was the moment. The grief of losing her had nearly drowned me. The betrayal of my own son threatened to crush me, but instead of bowing my head, I lifted it. They thought I was too weak to resist. They thought my sorrow would blind me. They thought wrong. By the time the sun dipped low and the shadows deepened, my mind was clear. The study no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a war room. Every file, every memory, every detail in that space reminded me not of loss, but of strength. I slid the folder closer, set the lawyer's number beside it, and whispered to the empty room, "This ends on my terms." That night had no ending. It was the beginning of something new, a fight I hadn't expected to face, but one I could no longer avoid. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at Evelyn's roses. They were still blooming, still alive, still beautiful. And so was the fire in me. Tomorrow I will make the call. Tomorrow I will take back control. Tomorrow the battle would truly begin. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before the sun and sat in my study with a cup of coffee that went cold while I watched the light crawl across the floor. The oak desk Evelyn gave me on our 10th anniversary felt solid under my palms, steady and cool. Last night I promised her photograph I would not let greed tear apart what we built. This morning, I kept that promise. I took out a yellow legal pad and wrote the 3 calls I needed to make. The first was to Michael Grant, our attorney. The second was to the bank. The third was to the lab that had sent me the report, which I had not yet spoken aloud. I called Michael at 7 sharp. He answered on the second ring, his voice the same calm baritone that carried me through deals and disputes for 2 decades. I told him I needed him at the house at 3:15 this afternoon, not 3 o'clock, not 3:30, 3:15. He was quiet for a breath and then asked if I was sure. "After you say this," he said, "there is no going back." I looked at the wedding picture on the mantel, at Evelyn's eyes that always saw the best in me, and I said yes. Bring your briefcase. Bring the originals. The second call was to the bank. I knew the numbers as well as I knew the lines on my hands. Operating account $420,000 as of Friday. Payroll on Thursday, $118,000 set to clear. Equipment lease, $42,000 due in 6 days. I asked the manager to place a dual signature hold on any transfers above $10,000 that were not payroll or vendor invoices already approved. No discretionary movement, no wire to anywhere without my counter-signature. He said he would flag the account and send me a confirmation email in 15 minutes. He did. I printed it and slid it into a blue folder. The third call was to the lab's case manager. I did not need anything more than I already had, but I wanted the words in my ears again, steady and clinical. Chain of custody intact. Samples verified. Report peer-reviewed before release. Conclusion in bold type. The probability of paternity is 0%. I thanked her and hung up, then set the manila envelope in the center of my desk and rested my hand on it the way a man might touch a sealed letter from a past he had outlived. By 9:30, I had the room arranged the way I wanted it. 2 leather chairs face my desk, a pitcher of water, 3 glasses. The grandfather clock that Evelyn insisted we buy for our 25th anniversary ticked in the corner, a patient metronome. I stood at the window and looked into the yard. Her roses were still blooming, pink and white and stubborn. I breathed in and told myself to do the same. David called an hour before the meeting to say they were on their way. He sounded like a man delivering a sales pitch, upbeat, confident, a little too smooth. Melissa did not call. She never did. She simply arrived where money might move. They came at 2:58. David wore a navy suit that fit him well and a tie I had given him 5 Christmases ago. Melissa wore a dress that belonged at a gala, not a family meeting, and heels that clicked hard on the wood floor. She glanced around the study like it was a property listing. Ceiling height, floor finish, window light. The look in her eyes wasn't grief. It was an appraisal. We exchanged the kind of greetings people use when kindness has become a costume. David sat, flipped open a leather portfolio, and slid a neat stack of papers across my desk. He had titled it Modernization Plan. He spoke in a measured tone that sounded practiced, like he had said these lines to a mirror. He proposed we sell the warehouse block on Riverside, 5 acres I had acquired for $300,000 when everyone else called it a lost cause. He had it penciled in for a sale at $3.5 million, maybe more if a developer wanted the river frontage. He proposed we lay off 18 long-tenured workers and replace them with contract crews. He had percentages to show a 28% reduction in payroll and projections that put our margins up by 3 points in the first year. He proposed we shutter the machine shop, sell 3 excavators and 2 loaders, and lease equipment as needed. Asset light, he said, and smiled like he had learned a magic word. Melissa leaned forward and tapped a line on the page with a manicured nail. "And this sentimental payroll," she said, "it has to go. You're paying for loyalty that doesn't improve EBITDA. The industry has changed. We need a learner structure. No more dead weight." Dead weight. I pictured Carlos Ramirez, who had been with me for 22 years, who drove a loader through a snowstorm to clear a hospital entrance so an ambulance could get in. I pictured Mark Thompson, who worked night shifts for 6 weeks when his wife was sick so he could make it to her chemo in the afternoons. I folded my hands and looked at my son. "Tell me about the South Yard," I said quietly. "What do you intend to do with the 20,000 square feet of covered storage?" David flipped pages and told me we could sublease it to a distributor. He had already circled a figure in pencil, $180,000 a year. He said it like he was calling a play, quick, clean, certain. He did not mention that the South Yard was where we held the steel and the pipe and the rebar that let us move fast when other firms had to wait. He did not mention how many times that speed had won us a bid. He did not mention the storage racks I had built with my own hands on a Sunday afternoon while Evelyn brought me iced tea. Then he turned the page to a rendering of a new logo. "We'll rebrand," he said. "Update the website, Shift to commercial development, high-margin work, hospitality, and retail. I've got a friend in Chicago who can walk us into a few deals if we can show we're ready." Melissa sat back with a satisfied little smile. She crossed her legs, tilted her head, and watched my face for cracks. She expected resistance and an argument. She expected me to snap. I did not. I had learned long ago to let silence do some of the talking. When she could not stand the quiet, she filled it. "We know this is hard, especially so soon after Evelyn," she said, using my wife's name like a prop. "But this is the best move. And at 65, she added, her voice soft but the cut deliberate, retirement is a gift you should let yourself have. David is ready." I felt something rise in my chest. Not the raw grief from last week, not the helpless shock from the night I first saw the lab report. Something steadier. "Thank you for sharing the plan," I said. "It's thorough, it's bold, and if we were a hedge fund, I might be impressed. But we're not. Before we discuss any transfer of authority or change in direction, I want my attorney in the room to document the conversation and to make sure we do this the right way. Michael will be here at 3:15. David's mouth tightened. Melissa glanced at the clock and let out a breath. The grandfather clock answered with a patient tick. She forced a smile. "We don't need lawyers for a family discussion," she said, as if the word lawyer were an insult. "Today," I said, "we do." The room slowed. Time has a way of stretching in those minutes when the truth is walking up a front path. I stood and poured water into 3 glasses and set them down. I asked David about his thoughts on the equipment lease. I asked Melissa, mild as the weather, how she calculated the savings on health insurance after the layoffs. She had figures, and she offered them like they were proof of wisdom. Numbers can comfort people who have never held a payroll check for a man whose daughter was about to start college. At 3:15, the doorbell rang. The sound slid down the hallway and into the room like a bell tolling. I left them seated and went to the door. Michael stood there with his leather briefcase and his calm face. He offered his hand and his condolences the way good men do, with few words and a kind look. We walked back to the study. David stood. Melissa stood half a second later. Michael sat beside them, opened his briefcase, and set a folder on my desk. He looked at me, not them, and asked again if I was certain. "There is a moment in every life when you choose the road you will not be able to unwalk." I nodded. "Before we discuss management," I said, "there's a family matter we have to address first. It changes the context." "Michael." Michael opened the folder. He did not draw it out. He did not dramatize it. He placed the lab report on the desk, turned it so David could read it, and spoke in the voice he used in depositions. "Chain of custody. Certified lab." The test date was 3 weeks ago. 2 samples compared. 1 from me, 1 from David. The conclusion is written in capital letters. The probability of paternity is 0%. The room did not explode. It imploded, silent and sudden. David stared at the page as if letters could rearrange themselves if he stared hard enough. He did not speak. His throat worked. His fingers creased the edge of the paper. Melissa broke the silence first. She did not even look at him. She looked at me. "So," she said, "what does that mean for the company?" A hot, clean anger moved through me, not the kind that shouts, the kind that aligns a man's spine. Michael cleared his throat and said we would get to the company in a moment. He explained how the test had been ordered. He confirmed that additional testing could be done if we wished, but the result was clear. He slid a second copy of the report toward David and left it there like a quiet stone. David swallowed and finally asked a single question, rough at the edges. "Who?" he said, and then stopped. The name did not matter now. Not yet. I told him I would answer every question he had about the past when he was ready to hear it. What mattered today was the future. What mattered was what we did with the next hour. Melissa turned to him then, leaned close, and spoke words that cut deeper than any test result could. "See," she whispered, but loud enough for all of us to hear. "I told you. He never saw you as his real son. This is just the excuse he's been waiting for. DNA is his way to push you out and keep the 12 million for himself. It landed like poison on open skin. I felt my jaw tighten. I thought of the nights I stayed up with a feverish boy so Evelyn could sleep. I thought of the mornings I drove to school plays, baseball games, and parent meetings. I thought of $25,000 for his car, $60,000 for college, $80,000 for a wedding, and 1,000 small gifts no ledger could record. She was not only slandering me, she was taking a knife to the bond I had fought to preserve for 33 years, the bond Evelyn had begged me to protect. I did not raise my voice. I do not know if I even blinked. "Melissa," I said. "Enough." I raised David. "He is my son in every way that matters. This report changes biology. It does not change history, and it does not give you the right to rewrite either one." She leaned back and crossed her arms, eyes glittering. "We can retest," she said lightly. Maybe the lab made a mistake, or maybe someone wanted a result. Michael's voice stayed even. "You are free to request an independent test," he said. "But I will note for the record that we verified the chain of custody, and the lab's procedures meet federal standards. This is a reliable result." David stayed quiet. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the paper the way a man might stare at a tide he cannot stop. I breathed in. This was the point where sorrow could pull me under again, or where resolve could keep me standing. I remembered the second call I made this morning. I remembered the manager's confirmation. I turned a blue folder toward me and slid out the sheet from the bank. "Before we go further," I said, "you should both know the operating account now requires my countersignature for any transfer over $10,000. Payroll and approved vendor invoices will run as scheduled. Nothing else moves. Not today." Melissa's smile cracked. She recovered quickly, tilting her head. "We don't need to move money," she said. "We only need you to sign the transfer of ownership documents. Then David can make routine decisions. There's no reason to complicate the simple with drama." "There are reasons," I said. "Some of them are in this room." She shrugged and tried a different route. "You're grieving," she said, her voice sweet as syrup. "You're not thinking clearly. David can step in and handle the day-to-day while you rest. Why drag a lawyer into this?" "It's precisely because I am thinking clearly that Michael is here," I said. "And because I know what this company is and is not. It is not a toy you rebadge and flip. It is not a wallet you open because you are impatient. It is a living thing. Families depend on it. 63 families. If you want me to hand over what your mother and I built, you will show me you can carry it without dropping it." David finally lifted his head. His cheeks were tight, his eyes rimmed red. "Why now?" he asked, voice low. "Why tell me this now?" "Because today," I said, "you asked me to dismantle what your mother spent her life tending. Because you spoke of men like Carlos and Mark as if they were numbers. Because you stood where she stood and suggested a fire sale of the Riverside block for a quick win. Because I have tolerated a great many things that didn't matter. This matters." He exhaled, and the air seemed to leave the room with him. He was not the only one hurting. I felt the pain, too, but I would not let pain steer the ship. Not now. Michael folded his hands and asked if we wanted a short break. I told him no. I wanted to finish what we started. I could feel the shift inside me, subtle but real. Yesterday, I was a man stumbling under grief and disbelief. Today, I was a man with a plan. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. Melissa reached for the modernization plan as if she could pull us back into the script she had prepared. "Let's not lose focus," she said. "This is a $12 million business. We all want it to grow. Selling Riverside is the first step. We can get letters of intent this week. We can lay off the first 10 by the end of the month. We can do a sale-leaseback on the equipment yard and free up at least $1.1 million in cash. If we move quickly, we can avoid spooking the market." The ease with which she said lay off still shocks me. Words can be neat when hands are clean. "We're not making decisions about Riverside today," I said. "We're not making decisions about layoffs today. We are establishing ground truth. Then we will talk about the structure of ownership. And when we do, it will be with clarity, not pressure. Michael nodded and reached into his briefcase again. He did not take out the next folder yet. He rested his hand on it. I knew what was inside. I had asked him to bring it. Not to show, not yet. Just to have ready. I stood and walked to the window. The air outside had shifted as the afternoon lengthened. A breeze moved the roses. They bent and swayed and did not break. I thought of Evelyn watering those flowers in the dawn, humming to herself, smiling when she saw a new bud. She believed people could grow. She believed forgiveness had power. I believe that too, but forgiveness is not surrender. Love is not blind. I turned back to my son. I am not here to humiliate you, I said quietly. I am here to stop a train before it jumps the track. I am here to protect what your mother built with me, and to protect you from choices you will not be able to undo. I am here because I still believe you can become the kind of man this company needs, but not by fiat, not by inheritance, by work, by time, by proof. Melissa made a small sound in her throat, a scoff, a spark. Proof, she said with a laugh that held no humor. He doesn't need to prove anything to you. He's your son. I looked at the report on the desk. The room went very quiet. He is my son, I said, which is why he will not be handed a burden he cannot carry, which is why he will not be used as a key to unlock $12 million for someone else's ambition. She shifted and stared at me. There are moments when a person shows you exactly who they are. This was one. She did not apologize. She did not soften. She calculated. Michael lifted his pen and asked if we should put certain items on record. I agreed. He summarized the meeting time and the attendees. He read the lab result into the record and noted our intent to move forward with a discussion of corporate governance at a later session. He asked if we wanted to set that session now. I said we would. I took a breath and looked at my son, not at the woman who had come to collect. David's face had changed. The air of certainty was gone. In its place was a man who had been told a truth that unmade the story he lived inside for 33 years. He needed time. He needed space. He needed, for once, not to be pushed. We're done for today, I said. We'll meet again here tomorrow at 3. Michael will be present. Between now and then, no assets are to be sold, no letters of intent are to be signed, and no layoffs are to be initiated. If there is movement on any account that requires my signature, it will not be given. Melissa opened her mouth. I raised a hand, and the words stopped. I do not know if it was the gesture or the look on my face, but she closed it again. David stood slowly. His chair made a small sound against the rug. He did not take the report with him. He left it on the desk, flat and heavy, as if he could not carry it yet. He walked to the door, then paused and looked at the photograph of Evelyn on the mantel. He did not say her name. He did not have to. The look was enough. They left together, Melissa a half step ahead, already typing on her phone, moving to whatever angle she believed could regain the ground she had lost. The front door closed. The house was silent. The grandfather clock ticked. Michael stayed seated. He gave me time to breathe. When I was ready, he opened his briefcase and slid the next folder a few inches forward. Not enough to break the seal, just enough to signal the future sitting in front of us. I rested my fingers on the cover. The paper felt warm. Tomorrow, I said. We talk structure. He nodded. Tomorrow, he said. We talk structure. I walked him to the door, thanked him, and then went back to the study where the light had turned amber. I stood by the window again and looked at the roses. Their petals moved in the wind like small flags. I thought of the men whose names Melissa did not bother to learn. I thought of the South Yard. I thought of Riverside. I thought of payroll on Thursday and the way the faces of our crews looked on Friday afternoons when checks were handed out. Gratitude, relief, pride. I thought of the night Evelyn and I signed the documents that would protect the business if anything ever happened to me. She had pressed the pen to my palm and said in that steady voice that never wavered, "We prepare because we love them. I opened the drawer and lifted out a small black notebook where I kept the things that mattered. I wrote the date and the hour. I wrote one sentence. They think I am weak, but they are about to learn how wrong they are. Then I closed the notebook and slid it back into place. I picked up the lab report and placed it in the safe. I picked up the bank confirmation and clipped it to the blue folder. I took the photograph of Evelyn from the mantel and set it on my desk. "We are not done," I whispered. "We are just getting started." Outside, the late light made the roses glow. Inside, the study felt less like a room and more like a base camp. Tomorrow, I will open the folder Michael had placed on my desk. Tomorrow, I will put the next piece on the table. Tomorrow, I will speak words that would change the shape of everything. They did not know it yet, but I did. I had the document in my hands that would decide the future of a $12 million company and every person it supported. I had the thing they never expected. I had the structure, and tomorrow they would hear it. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. Michael's conference room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. The table was heavy, dark, the kind of wood that remembers every hand that ever rested on it. Sunlight slid along the blinds in pale stripes. I arrived 10 minutes early and stood by the window, watching a pair of sparrows bounce along the sill. My pulse was steady. My mind was clear. Yesterday was grief and shock. Today was structured. Michael came in with a leather folder tucked under his arm. He didn't waste words. He only asked if I was ready. I said yes, and my voice didn't tremble. He set the folder at the head of the table, to my right. At 3 o'clock on the dot, David and Melissa walked in together. David's tie was tight, his eyes tired. Melissa wore a sharp jacket and carried a tote bag big enough to hold a change of plans. She didn't meet my eyes. She scanned the room, clocked the chair placements, and took a seat where she could see both me and the door. We exchanged greetings that felt like paper. Michael pressed the record button on a small device and spoke the date, the time, and the names in the room. He noted that this was a follow-up session to yesterday's meeting at my home. He asked if we were here to discuss corporate structure and governance. I said we were. David nodded, slowly. Melissa said, "Let's be efficient," and crossed one leg over the other with a quick flick of her ankle. Michael opened the leather folder and slid a bound document toward the center. It looked simple. White paper, black print, a blue ribbon through the spine. He placed a single page on top so the heading faced them. Declaration of Trust, he read. For Miller Construction Group, executed 15 years ago when the company's valuation reached $5 million. His finger tapped the date. It was there in ink. Evelyn's handwriting lived on the witness line, neat and careful. Mine on the signature line, steady and centered. Michael's voice stayed even. The trust holds all corporate equity. The company is not part of any joint estate plan. It is not included in Evelyn's will. Personal assets were addressed in her will last week. The company was not. Melissa shifted, but she said nothing yet. David leaned closer, scanning the first page like a man looking for a trapdoor. Michael continued. The trust names Thomas Miller as primary trustee. It outlines succession criteria for any potential successor trustee or controlling beneficiary. He lifted a second page. The criteria are specific. 5 years of meaningful work inside the business. No figurehead roles. Demonstrated financial responsibility. An understanding that the company exists to serve the community as well as the bottom line. 51% equity to the successor only after these conditions are met and certified. David looked up. He didn't speak, but I saw the question form behind his eyes. Melissa broke the quiet first. She set her palms flat and pushed a breath through her nose. "This isn't enforceable," she said. "You can't just hide a $12 million company inside a trust and pretend a will doesn't matter. There's joint property, marital property. There are laws." Michael didn't flinch. "This trust is enforceable," he said. "It's been reviewed annually. Taxes filed accordingly. Court decisions in this state support this structure. The company is a distinct asset. The will that was read last week was accurate. Personal items, the house, Evelyn's accounts, those are separate. The company is here. He tapped the blue ribbon again, gentle as a gavel. The room absorbed that. In the quiet, I could hear my own breath, steady, and David's, uneven. Melissa's eyes hardened, like glass cooling. "So you brought us here," she said, "to say that nothing we discussed yesterday matters. That's your play." I shook my head. "I brought you here to say that everything we discussed yesterday matters," I said. "It matters enough to put it in the right frame. We are not tearing through a business like tourists through a yard sale. We are not flipping machines and throwing men overboard. We are talking about the future of 63 families and the name your mother carried with honor." She tilted her head and smiled a thin, cold little smile. "Your wife didn't carry your name with honor," she murmured. "Not always." The softness in her voice was more dangerous than a shout. "You think I won't go to the press? One little call about Evelyn's weekend in Chicago, and you won't have a company left to hide inside your pretty trust? Reputation matters, Mr. Miller. Headlines matter. Beloved businesswoman's secret. Husband covers it up for decades. Sponsors vanish. Contracts stall. You will lose your precious empire faster than you can say legacy. Sign it over to David quietly today, or we burn it down together." The world narrowed to the edge of the table. For 1 second, I was 29 again, looking into Evelyn's tear-filled eyes and choosing to forgive her. In the next second, I was 65 and standing between my wife's memory and a woman who would drag a dead mother through the mud to gain an inch of cash. I didn't slam my hand. I didn't shout. I lifted my chin. "Don't you dare use Evelyn to extort me," I said. "She made a mistake. She lived in truth after that day. She earned back trust with a lifetime of love and work. You won't rewrite her story with your spite. Not here. Not ever." Michael's pen clicked softly. He kept his voice calm and clear. "I'm placing on the record that Mrs. Melissa Miller has threatened to contact the press with private information unrelated to corporate governance, with the stated intent to damage the company if her financial demands are not met." He looked up at her. "That, counsel would argue, is attempted coercion." "Spare me," she said, tossing a hand. "You can spin anything into a legal word if you try hard enough." She didn't notice the way David had gone very still. He was staring at the table, at the trust document, at his mother's signature. He looked smaller for a moment, like a boy in a too-big chair. His jaw clenched and unclenched. He rose halfway, then sat again, like standing would break him. Michael turned the page. He didn't look at Melissa again. He addressed David. "The trust also contains provisions around disqualifying influence," he said. "If a successor's spouse or close partner is found to undermine the values and operation of the business or to manipulate governance decisions for personal gain, that behavior can disqualify the successor. The intent is protective, not punitive. It safeguards employees and the community from short-term exploitation." Melissa laughed. It wasn't a joyful sound. "You wrote yourself a little moral clause," she said to me. "How convenient." "I wrote a boundary," I said. "It keeps us from becoming something we're not." I paused, then added, "And, Melissa, it protects David from anyone who would use him as a wallet with legs." She sat back, eyes cold as coins. For the first time since she walked in, I saw her confidence flicker, only for a breath. But it was there. Michael slid another paper forward, this one just 2 pages, crisp, precise. "I have here a letter from First National Bank," he said, "confirming a home equity loan opened 3 months ago for $260,000, using the house at 117 Brookside as collateral. The file includes a signature for Mr. David Miller. It also includes the bank's internal note that the signature did not match their historical samples and that a callback verification was attempted but not completed. The account is now 60 days past due. Foreclosure proceedings begin Monday." David's head snapped up as if someone had pulled a string in his neck. He stared at Michael, then at me. "What loan?" he asked, voice raw. "What house? What are you talking about?" I kept my eyes on Melissa because I already knew. "The loan you didn't know your wife opened," I said quietly. "The one who used my property as collateral. The one that pulled $260,000 into a can't-fail opportunity in Phoenix." "Which failed. The bank called me yesterday morning because they couldn't reach you. They thought perhaps I could help. I can, but not the way Melissa imagines." The name of the city landed like a gavel. Melissa's lips parted. She recovered. She tried a smile. "He's overreacting," she said. "It was a bridge loan, short-term. We were going to roll it into a refinance once the cash flow settled. It's normal. It's basic asset management." "Don't insult me," I said. "I have managed assets longer than you've been alive. This wasn't management. This was a grab, and you did it with a forged signature on my house." "Alleged?" she said quickly. "Alleged." Michael lifted the second page of the bank letter. "The bank's compliance team attached an internal audio clip," he said. "A call was placed to the listed applicant for voice verification. The voice that answered did not match Mr. Miller's file. The caller hung up when asked to confirm his mother's maiden name." He slid a small USB drive across the table. "We'll deliver this to counsel if necessary." Melissa's color drained and rushed back, 2 waves. "You can't bring private bank recordings into a discussion of fraud tied to this company's property," Michael said. "We can, and will." David pressed both hands to his forehead. He took a long breath that shuddered in the middle. "Melissa," he said, not looking at her, "tell me you didn't sign my name." She stared at the window instead of him. "I did what I had to do to push us forward," she said, flat. "You keep talking about plans. You never act. I acted." "On my father's house," he whispered, "with my name." Silence settled, the kind that isn't empty, the kind that weighs. I felt neither triumph nor glee. I felt the clean, hard edge of truth doing what it does when you finally set it down. It cuts through fog. It cuts through pretending. It leaves what matters standing and lets the rest fall. Michael slid one last document on top of the trust. "Given these facts," he said, "Thomas is prepared to make an offer. It aligns with the successor criteria already in the trust. It also provides a path to avoid foreclosure. It is not an ultimatum. It is a choice." I looked at my son, not at the woman who had tried to twist the day, at my son. "David," I said, "you can start tomorrow. Entry level, 6 a.m. You'll work with Carlos's crew on the Riverside Foundation. You'll learn the field. You'll learn the shop. You'll learn the books. No fast tracks. No special titles. 5 years of real work. If you do that, and if your life supports it, which means no one undermines the values of this company, you'll inherit 51% from this trust. If you choose not to, the trust dissolves the company at a time of my choosing, pays generous severance to every employee, and the remainder funds a foundation in your mother's name. I will pay off the $260,000 loan tomorrow to stop the bank, but only if you accept, and only if Melissa agrees in writing to conditions that protect you and the company from further risk." Melissa found her voice. She sprayed it across the table like acid. "You're blackmailing us." "No," I said. "I'm offering a lifeline with rules. Rules that exist to save more than money. They exist to save you if you want saving, and to save this business from becoming a thing your mother wouldn't recognize." She laughed again, but it cracked at the end. "He won't do manual labor for 5 years. He has an MBA. He doesn't need to swing a hammer to run a company." "His MBA taught him theory," I said. "It didn't teach him what it feels like when a delivery is late and a pour is scheduled. It didn't teach him what it takes to weld a seam straight in a crosswind. It didn't teach him what it means to hand a paycheck to a man who has 2 kids and a sick wife. The trust requires experience because experience humbles you into wisdom." David finally dropped his hands and looked at me across the table. In his eyes was anger, shame, hurt, and something else. A question. "And if I fail," he asked, voice steadying, What then? Then you fail trying to become better, I said. There are worse ways to fail. I can live with that. Can you? He looked at the floor. He looked at the trust again. He looked, for the first time that day, directly at his wife. She held his gaze for a second, then cut her eyes away and stared at the closed door like there might be another option waiting in the hall. Melissa pivoted to a new angle. "This is ridiculous," she said, pitching her voice low, reasonable. "You don't need to play his game. We can go to court, challenge the trust, challenge the timing, tell the world he planned this DNA stunt. People will side with you. You're the wrong son. He's the controlling father with a secret. You'll win public sympathy. We'll settle. We'll take the company public in 2 years and cash out. Easy." David flinched at the word stunt. Michael's pen moved. He did not look up. He didn't have to. We had everything we needed on the record. I folded my hands. "If you decide to go to war," I said softly, "understand the battlefield. The trust is sound. The accounts are locked. The bank is already cooperating. Every move you try to make will trip an alarm. And while you spend 2 years trying to blow this up, the men who depend on this company will go without the leadership they deserve. I will not let that happen. I am not afraid to end this company rather than let it be bled dry by entitlement. That is not a bluff. That is a boundary." The word boundary hung in the room like a bell tone after the hammer. For a long moment, no one spoke. The blinds clicked softly as a breeze moved them. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Melissa's face changed again. Fury replaced poise. She leaned forward, eyes bright with heat. "You think you can humiliate us?" she said. "You think you can parade your little trust and your little loan and win. You forget. I know how to fight. I will make phone calls. I will tell every friend with a platform that Evelyn was not the saint you paint her to be. I will remind this town that even the perfect families rot." I felt the pain of that land like a stone to the ribs. But pain is not the same as power. I kept my voice almost gentle. "You have already told me who you are," I said. "Thank you for the clarity." Michael closed the trust and set a new sheet on top. It was an agreement to consider the successor path. Nothing binding. Acknowledgement of receipt. A place for a date. A place for a signature. He angled it toward David. "You don't need to sign it now," Michael said. "You have tonight. Tomorrow at 6 a.m. is the first shift on Riverside. If you're there, we take that as your answer. If you're not, we take that as your answer." Melissa started to protest. David reached out and laid his fingers on the paper, not to sign, just to feel it. He nodded once, small, and drew his hand back. We stood. The chairs scraped softly. Michael stopped the recorder and noted the time. He gathered the papers with the precision of a man for whom order is both habit and shield. As we walked toward the door, Melissa paused, turned to me, and threw one last dart. "You think you won," she said. "You haven't seen what I can do yet." I met her eyes. "I have seen enough," I said, "and so has he." They left without shaking hands. The hallway felt longer than when they walked in. The air felt different, lighter and heavier, both at once. I closed the door behind them and let my back rest against it for one quiet breath. Michael poured 2 fingers of water into a paper cup and handed it to me like a sacrament. "You did what you came here to do," he said. "Now we wait." I looked down at my hands. They were steady. "I don't like that she used Evelyn," I said. "I know the past. I lived it, but using it like that?" Michael nodded. "That's because you loved a person," he said. "She loves the leverage. They're different languages." We returned to the table. He tucked the trust back inside the leather folder, then slid a small envelope to me. "The bank's wire instructions," he said. "If he shows up tomorrow, we will release the $260 to stop foreclosure. If he doesn't, we let the bank proceed. It can be reversed later if he changes course. But urgency is leverage, too." I slipped the envelope into my inside pocket. It sat there like a sealed promise. I looked out at the city through the blinds. People walked on the sidewalk, carrying coffee, talking about small things that fill a life. Inside this room, we had drawn lines that would change the shape of ours. A man can spend decades building a dam against the river and one afternoon opening the gates. It makes a sound you feel in your bones. As I reached for the door, Michael placed one more page on the table. It was thin, just a paragraph. An amendment filed last month, the one Evelyn and I had discussed in the hospital. The garden clause, we called it, when we still had time to joke. It names the beneficiaries if the trust is dissolved. It is named the severance plan for every employee. It is named the fund that would carry her name forward in scholarships for children of tradespeople. I rested my palm on the paper and closed my eyes. "We prepare because we love them," she had said. We had prepared. On my drive home, the sky turned the color of worn copper. I rolled down the window and let the air move through the cab. The truck smelled like dust and coffee and the faint ghosts of job sites. When I turned onto Brookside, the roses along my fence were open, soft, stubborn, alive. I parked, sat a moment, and watched a bee vanish inside a bloom. Inside, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't hurt. I set the leather folder on the oak desk and placed Evelyn's photograph beside it. The light from the window threw gold across the glass. I spoke to her picture because sometimes a man needs to hear his own voice promise what his heart already knows. "They thought I was weak," I said softly. "Now they'll see the consequences." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number with a link and a line that read, "Talk to me or this goes public." Melissa or someone doing her work. I turned the phone face down and let it be. You can chase every spark and call it fire, or you can tend the hearth that keeps your home warm. I chose the second. I opened the safe and slid the envelope inside, then pulled out a small spiral notebook where I kept things too important to trust to memory. I wrote the date, the hour, and 3 words: trust, truth, tomorrow. The pen felt heavy and right in my hand. I could almost feel Evelyn's hand on my shoulder, light and steady, the way she used to stand behind me at this very desk when the numbers were tight and belief had to carry us across a thin plank. Night settled, soft as a shawl. In the backyard, the motion sensor clicked and the path lights blinked on, one by one, a string of small suns along the stones we had laid ourselves. I walked out and stood in the garden. The air smelled like cut grass and earth. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and fell quiet. I remembered David as a boy, chasing fireflies here, palms open, laughter skipping across the lawn. I remembered the time he fell and skinned both knees and looked up at me, waiting to see whether I would be angry or gentle. I had been gentle. I could be again. But gentleness now meant something different. It meant telling the truth and letting it work. Tomorrow at dawn, I will drive to Riverside. I would stand with Carlos and the crew and watch to see if a silver sedan rolled up and a man in a work shirt stepped out. I would not say much. I would nod. I would hand him a pair of gloves and point to the rebar rack, and I would see which story he chose to live. Inside, I rinsed a glass at the sink and set it upside down on the towel to dry. I turned off the kitchen light and the living room lamp. In the study, I touched the blue ribbon of the trust one more time. There was nothing dramatic left to do. The dramatic part had already happened. The heaviest piece had already fallen into place. Plans built on sand had collapsed. The numbers, 12,260,000, had done the thunder work. The words, chain of custody, disqualifying influence, had done the blade work. Now the quiet would do the rest. Before I went upstairs, I sat at the desk and breathed with the clock. Slow in, slow out. I thought about the men who would report at dawn, the woman who kept the books straight and the trucks registered, the apartments where dinner would be bought with checks printed on Thursday, the little girl who would bring home a college acceptance letter in 3 years and cry on her mother's shoulder because someone like us had offered a scholarship named after a woman she'd never meet. I thought about legacy, a word that can turn syrupy unless you've carried a beam under it in the rain. I thought about justice, a word that sometimes sounds like a court and sometimes sounds like a father telling the truth without cruelty. My phone buzzed again. Another text, another link. I let it buzz in the drawer. Then I stood, turned out the study light, and let the dark settle like a blessing. Feeling dismissed and threatened is hard, isn't it? If you believe everyone deserves justice, comment the word justice. Now watch what they do to change it. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The night after the meeting in Michael's office was long. I didn't sleep much. I sat at my desk in the study, the same oak desk Evelyn had given me on our 10th anniversary. And I thought about every word that had been said. Melissa's threats still rang in my ears, but louder than that was the silence of David, the way he touched the trust papers without signing, the way he looked at his wife and then at the floor. I knew he was wrestling with something bigger than money. He was wrestling with himself. At dawn, I walked out to the garden and watched the roses open to the first light. My hands brushed the petals, and I whispered to Evelyn's picture that sat on the windowsill. We'll know by tonight if he chooses truth over comfort. By 7 that morning, I got my answer. A knock at my door startled the quiet. I opened it to find David standing there, his hair uncombed, his tie missing, his shirt wrinkled. His eyes looked tired but steady. "Dad," he said, voice low, "I'll do it. I'll start from the bottom. I want to prove myself. Not to Melissa, not to the board. To you, to Mom, to myself." It wasn't eloquent, but it was enough. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the table where Evelyn and I had once celebrated every birthday with him. I didn't speak right away. I let him pour out what had been turning inside all night. He told me he had confronted Melissa when they got home. He asked her directly about the loan, the forged signature, and the lies she spun. She didn't deny it. She simply told him he was weak for questioning her. "She said I wasn't man enough to build a future without you," he admitted, voice breaking. "I realized she never wanted me. She wanted the company. She wanted what you built." The silence after that admission was heavy, like stone. Finally, I put my hand on the table and said, "David, this company is not a gift. It's a responsibility. If you want it, you'll have to carry it. That means 5 years. From the ground up. If you walk away or fail, everything we've built turns into something bigger than both of us, a foundation in your mother's name. That's the boundary. That's the truth." He nodded slowly. "I accept." The next morning, he showed up at the Riverside site. Carlos handed him a pair of gloves and a hard hat. He bent his head and went to work like any other man on that crew. At first, the labor broke him. His hands blistered. His back ached. He stumbled under the weight he wasn't used to carrying. Some men mocked him under their breath, saying he was just the boss's boy playing at work. But others noticed the way he came back every morning, tired but willing, never complaining. Little by little, the mocking faded. Respect began to take root. For me, those first months were a test too. I wanted to step in, to protect him, to smooth his path. But I knew better. The trust wasn't about comfort. It was about character. Every night he came home covered in dust, and every night he looked me in the eye and said, "I'll be back tomorrow." That was enough. Melissa didn't last. When David told her he was serious, that he would stay in a rented apartment near the job site and send her papers for separation, she screamed, she threatened, she cried. But eventually, she left. She moved back in with her mother, sold her car to cover her debts, and filed for bankruptcy within a year. I heard through neighbors that she later married the lawyer who handled her case. It was a fitting end for her, trading love for contracts, loyalty for transactions. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard it. I felt pity. She had wasted everything chasing something that was never hers. Years passed, 5 of them to be exact. David started on the ground pouring concrete, then moved into welding and then into logistics. He spent a year in the accounting office, balancing books until numbers stopped scaring him. He learned how to fire a man with dignity and how to hire one with wisdom. He learned that every dollar we earned carried the weight of families depending on it. The men who once mocked him began to nod when he walked past. They invited him to after-work barbecues. They called him boss without sarcasm. And finally, on a warm spring morning, exactly 5 years after that day in Michael's office, we sat down together at the same oak desk. I pulled out the trust, slid the papers across to him, and said, "You've met the terms. You've earned 51% of this company. Not as my son, as a man." His hands shook as he signed, but his voice was steady. "Thank you, Dad. I'll never forget what this took, or what it means." He didn't stop there. He looked at me with eyes that had grown older and wiser, and he said, "I want to create something in Mom's name, 5% of our profit every year, a scholarship fund for kids who want to learn trades, the Evelyn Miller Foundation. That's what she would have wanted." I couldn't speak right away. My throat closed and my eyes blurred. I just reached across the desk, laid my hand over his, and whispered, "She would be proud." That was the moment I knew the battle was over. Not just the legal fight, not just the financial storm. The deeper battle, the one for my son's soul, had found its answer. Melissa, meanwhile, faded into a footnote. The once sharp smile that threatened to undo us became a memory no one cared to revisit. She had chased money and lost it. She had chased power and found herself alone. Every rumor I heard about her only confirmed the truth. Betrayal consumes the betrayer first. As for me, peace came like the steady hum of a quiet house. I woke each morning without the weight of suspicion pressing on my chest. I tended Evelyn's roses, their blooms bright as if they too had survived the storm. I discovered the joy of painting in the afternoons, the brush moving across canvas without anyone asking for a signature or a check. I knew freedom not because I had won, but because I had chosen truth over fear. Sometimes David would come by after a long day. We'd sit on the porch with 2 glasses of iced tea, the air thick with summer crickets, and he would talk about his plans for the company. I didn't always agree, but I listened, and when he asked, I offered advice. He had become the kind of man who didn't need me to carry him, but still wanted me to stand beside him. That, to me, was victory. The lesson I carry is simple, but sharp. Family is not about blood alone. It is about respect, about truth, about the courage to set boundaries and hold them, even when it hurts. I told Evelyn's picture once, "I don't need them anymore. I have myself, and now I have a son who finally understands what that means." Looking back, I see the arc of it all. Betrayal tried to hollow me out, but instead it carved space for strength. Greed tried to destroy us, but instead it revealed what was real. Legacy isn't the buildings we own or the accounts we balance. Legacy is the truth that survives us. I know this story isn't mine alone. Many parents give everything to their children only to feel that love turns into entitlement. Many sons and daughters think inheritance is a right, not a responsibility. And many discover too late that betrayal doesn't buy happiness. To those parents, I say, set boundaries. To those children, I say, honor sacrifice. And to everyone living in this fast modern world, remember that character is the only wealth no one can steal. As spring turned to summer, I sat on the porch again and thought about what came next. The company was safe. David was steady. My heart was lighter. I found myself drawn to a local community center where volunteers built homes for veterans. I signed up for a Saturday shift, hammer in hand, sweat on my brow. It felt right. It felt like beginning again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That's how this chapter of my life closes. With peace, with freedom, with a new purpose waiting just around the corner. I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I know this. I am no longer defined by betrayal. I am defined by truth, by resilience, and by the love that refuses to die, even when tested by fire. And as I locked the study that night, I looked at Evelyn's picture and whispered, "We made it." I wake up most mornings now with the sun slipping gently across the curtains of my smaller home, a modest two-bedroom cottage on the edge of town. It isn't the grand estate Evelyn and I once filled with holidays and laughter, but it carries something I once thought I lost forever: peace. Out back, the garden blooms again. I spend hours with Evelyn's roses, pruning, watering, breathing in the fragrance that brings her closer to me. Each petal feels like a whisper from the past, reminding me that some memories don't fade. They simply settle into quieter corners of our lives. David has grown into the man I once prayed he would be. I still remember the first day he walked into the office after earning his way through the foundation of the company. He didn't carry arrogance anymore. He carried respect. Now he stands at the head of the business, not because of his name, but because he earned it. Employees who once mocked him now trust him. They know he will listen, that he will keep his word. The Evelyn Miller Foundation, which he started with 5% of the profits, has already provided scholarships to more than 40 young men and women, most of them children of workers who once broke their backs to keep the company afloat. Each time I see one of those students walk across a stage in a cap and gown, I know Evelyn's legacy lives on. As for Melissa, her story has taken another turn. A letter arrived last winter, her handwriting shaky, the paper smudged in places as if a tear had fallen. She wrote that she was sorry, that greed had blinded her, that she had destroyed not just her marriage, but her own dignity. She begged for a chance to talk. I held the letter in my hands for a long while, staring at the words, weighing them. In the end, I placed it back in the envelope and locked it away in my desk. I whispered to myself, I don't need their apology. I have my life. It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. Some doors must remain closed to keep the air inside fresh. The contrast is stark. While she drifts through rented apartments, chasing stability she may never find, I rise each day to the comfort of routine. My mornings are filled with quiet coffee, the newspaper folded just so, and the soft chatter of neighbors passing by. My evenings often end at the community center, where I hammer nails alongside veterans, rebuilding their lives, or hand out food at the shelter downtown. It's not grand work, but it is real. It reminds me that wealth is not measured in millions of dollars, but in the lives we touch and the truth we carry. I've thought a lot about the lessons from all of this. For parents, the lesson is simple, but often ignored. Do not hand over your life's work blindly. Love is not proof of readiness. Responsibility must be tested, earned, and proven. If we fail to set boundaries, we do not protect our children. We cripple them with entitlement. For sons and daughters, the lesson cuts just as deep. Inheritance is not a birthright. It is a trust, and a trust must be honored through sweat, sacrifice, and respect. To demand what you have not earned is to insult the very love that provided it. And for the world we live in, this modern, hurried, hungry world, the lesson is sharper still. Money is a tempting master. It whispers promises of freedom, power, respect. But it lies. Character is the only currency that holds its value when everything else collapses. Betrayal, no matter how cunning, eventually consumes the betrayer. Truth, though slow, always catches up. One small event sealed this truth for me not long ago. At the community center, a boy of 17 shyly handed me a letter of thanks. He was the son of one of our welders, and he had received a scholarship from the foundation. He wrote that he would be the first in his family to attend college, that he would study engineering, and that one day he wanted to come back and work for our company. As I read his words, I felt Evelyn's presence again. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my pocket. That small note was worth more than every dollar Melissa once tried to steal. Now, when I walk through my little home, I see reminders of both the battles and the peace that followed. The oak desk still sits in the study, scratched from years of use. On top of it rests Evelyn's old clock, ticking softly, a reminder that time moves forward no matter how fierce the storm. In the living room, there's a picture of David at a recent company banquet, smiling beside workers who once doubted him. That smile tells me the story has turned. The betrayal that nearly shattered us has become the stone that sharpened us instead. Sometimes people ask if I regret not answering Melissa's letter. My answer is always the same: no. I do not live in bitterness, I live in truth. To reply would be to reopen a wound that has finally healed. I learned that forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness is choosing peace for yourself and letting the other carry their burden alone. As I sit here tonight, pen in hand, the house quiet around me, I feel a calm that money can't buy. The roses outside are heavy with blooms, the air scented with their sweetness. I whisper to Evelyn's picture on the mantel, "We made it, love. We really made it." And I believe she smiles back. So here, at the end of it all, let me leave these final thoughts. Parents, guard your legacy with wisdom. Children, honor sacrifice with humility. And to anyone listening, remember, in a world drowning in noise and greed, integrity remains the anchor that holds us steady. I've come to see that character is the only inheritance no one can take, no one can forge, no one can destroy. It is the wealth that follows us when everything else has crumbled. And in that truth, I have found freedom. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.